Yo, what's going on, fellas? How y'all doing? It feels like we haven't recorded in a long time, but
It's
it
been a
feels good
minute.
to be back.
Feels like 10 years, bro, but it's only been a week. You know what I'm saying? But it feels good to be back. Welcome back, everybody. Happy to be here. And we actually just got back from vacation celebrating Dre's birthday. Dre getting up there a little bit.
Yeah, no, it was a good time. And no, you're right. It's your birthday is a good reminder of how old you're getting and how wise you're getting as well.
I was
So
getting ready to say,
I can't
wise.
complain. I can't. You know what, bro? I had to put the wisdom to the test immediately when I came back. I gotta tell y'all this wild story real quick.
Bro.
So yesterday,
Mhm.
me and my wife decided, like, all right, we're gonna grill. So the way my house is set up, I'm in a townhouse. It's 3 stories. And I have a second floor patio. It's covered, but it's a patio, nice size. And I have a grill on the patio. And I grill a lot, right? We got this as a wedding gift. I literally grill probably 3 times a week. It's so easy. Like I do
Oh,
it like
dang.
clockwork. Don't even think about it. Put anything on there. So yesterday I turned on the grill and I'm like, I'm heating up. I'm just gonna let it get hot so I can clean it off. And I sit down for like maybe 15 minutes, which I let it heat up definitely longer than I normally do. But I was like, yeah, I just let it heat up. And then I just all of a sudden I just take a look to my right, and there's literally a fire outside at my grill, like a big
Whoa.
fire. And I jump up and I'm like, what the and I go outside and I like lift up the
Yeah.
grill and it's like this huge fire. And I have a propane
Oh,
tank.
shit.
And the way my house is
Yeah.
set up, because I stay in a townhouse, I have like neighbors that are like right next to me, like super close to me. So
Yeah.
my first instinct is I'm not even really worried about the fire itself. I'm like, yo, this propane tank explode. I'm done. Like we're
Yeah.
all done.
Yeah.
Like this whole
Yeah.
block is done.
Yeah.
So I run
So
in the
you
house and
panicked?
no, of course not. Of course not. I didn't have time to
Stay
panic.
cool.
I had to
Stay
solve the
cool.
problem. I don't got time to panic.
Yeah.
So I run
Stay
back in the
cool.
house and I'm like, oh, we got a fire extinguisher. This is exactly why I told my wife we need fire extinguishers. For this exact reason. So I go grab the fire extinguisher, put the fire out. But I'm like, we should call 911 anyway, just to have them come. Cause I'm still worried about like the propane tank. Cause I'm like, I don't know if it's
Yeah.
overheated. It could just explode for no reason. I'm just like, yo,
Anything.
somebody needs
Yeah.
to check this out. So anyway, I put the fire out, but I called the fire department. They come out and they're like, yeah, what happened? I'm like, yeah, I saw this fire. I put it out and then I ran out. And what did you run out the house for? I'm like, because I thought the thing was going to explode. Bro, no, it's not going to explode. The fire is out. There's nothing to be worried about. The fire is out. Like, you're good to go. So I'm overreacting
Yeah.
for no reason. But anyway, like it all
Yeah.
turned out good. But yo, I had to put the wisdom to the test because when that happened, my girl immediately froze. So I just want to say to both of y'all,
No, you had to move.
because y'all live with y'all girls, have these emergency conversations with them on what to do when these things happen.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when it happens, you don't have time to explain stuff. You just gotta do. So yeah, I had to put
move.
the wisdom to the test. But luckily nobody got hurt. Nobody's house got burned down, thank God. And thank God it didn't explode, because that was like my biggest concern.
Well, look, I'm about to double check tonight our fire extinguishers just to make sure that that's in order. I'm also going to check
For real.
our smoke detectors. I like to think sometimes I get focused on maybe like the physical security part of stuff. So the keychains, the pepper spray, those things
Mhm.
but that's like it's a household accident. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
But I don't blame you for leaving the house. I would have been in the house either. I would have called 911 too. I would have sit outside. Yeah.
Yeah. Y'all double check for me.
Yeah,
Double
and
check.
then don't forget the stop, drop, and roll.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Thank God I didn't have to edit that one, bro. Man, I wouldn't be here today.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez.
So yeah, we all good, man. But how y'all been, man? How have y'all been doing our hiatus? Y'all been smooth?
I've been good, bro. So obviously, still the gig over at Northwestern is going really well, man. So we actually just wrapped up our summer cohort right before school year starts at the end of September. So that was good. Just being able to be hands on with founders and just see how different founders think. That was pretty cool. And then currently still building out AO. So started engineering last week. And so that should be wrapped up probably in about 2 weeks. I'll definitely have y'all on to be an alpha tester. I'm excited about that. We ran into a small hiccup because I realized originally we were going to build a Chrome extension. And yeah, just from a technical standpoint, Chrome extensions don't allow you to have multiple pages. And they make it extremely difficult to do API requests dynamically. And so, yeah, we're not going to be able to go that route anymore. And so
Yeah.
that's a bummer, but we'll get over that. And then, as I put in the group chat, man, got some good news this morning. Just locked in a scout position. So going to be writing checks, probably starting end of the year, beginning of the year. And this is one of many. And
Tell the audience a little bit about what a scout is in terms of VC and startups.
yeah. So I think it's very important for on our podcast, we're always talking about understand the business of venture capital, because that's what it is. It's a business and it has its own set of incentives, its own cost structure, its own strategy. And 99% of the time, it does not align with founders, right? So
Yes.
that's very important. But traditionally, not traditionally, when it comes to the game of venture, one of the most pivotal pieces of the model is deal sourcing. And if investors don't have access to good deals, regardless of what those channels are, it's very likely that you won't get into the best companies and therefore most likely won't have an opportunity at the best returns. And so for venture firms that are typically, I would say, sometimes on the smaller end, you even see scout programs for the larger venture firms like the Sequoias, the Adresas, things
Yes.
of that nature. But typically for the smaller firms, this is a strategy that they deploy in order to expand their deal sourcing without having to pay capital up front. Because once again, these venture firms are operating off the 2 and 20. And if I got a $50 million fund, and what is that? That's only about a mil. Yeah, I'm bringing in
Yeah.
a mil. Plus, I got to take care of salaries. Plus, I got to take care of like all the legal fees to be able to manage the fund. There's not much money to go around for headcount. And so typically they'll deploy these scout programs in order to be able to expand their deal sourcing and take advantage of different unique networks and things of that nature. So the way it works is there's a few ways it works, but traditionally it works like there's a set amount of capital that scouts will have the ability to deploy. Sometimes the decision is their decision. Sometimes it requires like partners and things of that nature. But also the other thing is there's sometimes flexibility around like what those check sizes can be. I know we were talking about that, Rodney. And then for some programs, the check size is what the check size is. If it's 25,000, it's 25,000. And like I'm not going to drop that many details on this one because homie hasn't announced his fund, but he's launching his new fund. And I just shot my shot. I was like, bro, if you can't hire me right now, but you
I know
need what I can
founders.
bring to the table. Exactly.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
we chatted about it, went really well. We're aligned on what we're going to do. So I'm looking forward to it. And I actually heard this really good podcast the other day where the founding managing partner over at, I want to say I'm going to mispronounce it, but his name is Adian Sincut. Yeah, his name is Adian
Hmm.
Sincut, and he's been on the Midas list for the past 10 years. He's at Felicius. I didn't even know what Felicius was, but they're a generalist firm. But he was talking about his fund and he was like, after doing this for a while, etc., like what I would tell people who are trying to build funds, it happens in 3 stages. The first stage is you want to prove your thesis. And that's typically what you're doing with fund one. And he was like, once you prove your thesis, then you want to focus on optimizing your reputation, right? Having that reputation that founders need to actually have you on their cap table. And then he was saying phase 3 is when you can start to optimize for different variables to increase performance. So if that's ownership percentages, things of that nature. And so that's how I'm looking at this opportunity. This is me proving my thesis and
Yeah.
building that track record. So when the time is right,
Hmm.
Yeah.
I can start my own fund.
That's what's
Yeah.
up, man. I'm
Well, off
excited for you,
jump.
bro.
Congratulations.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
So
Also, we really appreciate like the nuances of how you describe maybe different scout programs depending on the stage of the fund or what type of fund it is and how big the fund is. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of variety in how programs are run. Some will have additional resources for scout investments. Some people are scouts at multiple different places. Some people are founders that are scouts for a fund that's invested in them, et cetera. There's a lot of different scenarios. If you are someone that is interested in this scout, I think what it seems like is you want to be somebody that is known to, or is clear that you have access to founders at usually much earlier stages than most funds are looking at, which is why, for example, Sequoia Scout check might be as low as $10,000 or maybe even as high as $50,000, or it doesn't matter what the funds are. But speaking of scouts, though, one of our good friends, Josh, he's a product manager. He was a product manager. I'm sorry, he was a product manager at Burner, and then also one at TikTok, one of literally the biggest social media app we see right now. And then he started his company called Bonfire, and he's now working on something new.
Campfire.
Yeah, I said bonfire. I'm thinking of the fun. I'm thinking of the bonfire funds. I'm sorry, Josh, if you're listening. Campfire. Bonfire is just one of the funds like that's in Los Angeles, by the way. But Campfire was a social media app, was venture backed by a well-known investor, Charles Huston, and a few others. But anyways, he invested in a company called, let me just get this 100% correct, Bill Casa. They spent a year in stealth. So congratulations to them, because one, they raised $3.5 million, but it's not just about the money that you raise. They're on a mission to build 100,000 homes. And I think that's a mission that a lot of us can all get behind. And so congratulations to that team. Congratulations to Josh. And just also a little tidbit too. This person who started this company was also I believe, he used to be the CEO of Spin, which, for those that don't know, Spin was a part of the whole scooter wars in 2018, 2019, etc., between Lime, Bird, Spin, etc. And they have a little underground story almost, and they came out in a very interesting way. And without tapping too much into that, the founder essentially, though, is a serial entrepreneur, and he's doing something new, and it seems like it's a positive thing. So congratulations again to that team, but then also Josh for that being his first scout check. And hopefully we see any of our investments do the same.
Yeah, I love that company. What is it? It's called Casa, right?
Bill Casa.
Yep.
Bill Casa, yeah. I love what they're doing with taking advantage of the regulation change in California, because I have several friends in California who own real estate and who, because of this regulation change, are like starting to repurpose their properties themselves in order to like take advantage of it and to like build more units on their property and just make more capital. And so
What's the change?
so basically the change is a real estate zoning change that will allow landowners to essentially add more properties onto their existing space. Historically, there was a limit on the number of units that you could put on a property. So you couldn't just put an apartment building anywhere you wanted to, right? There was just a limit on the number of units you could have. And so now that limit has been expanded. And so now if you own a property, let's say you own an acre of land or half a block or something like that, and you only have one house on there, now you can build 5 houses. So like the amount of revenue that you can make per like square footage of land you own is just more, right? But like in my friends' cases, they happen to already be in real estate. So they already have access to capital. They're already a little bit more wealthy. So it's easy for them to go access existing capital to take advantage of this new regulation change. And so it looks like what Bill Costa is doing is bringing that same level of access to any property owner today who may not have that capital or access to be able to take advantage of their land. And yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think other cities, because it's just a general housing shortage, other states, I'm sorry, will probably start to roll out something similar. Yeah, kudos to Josh for catching that wave early, because this seemed like this could have some really big payoffs.
And I love the way that you even described that with just a deeper understanding of the problem that even I myself even have personally. And look, I want to say off the gate, first things first, I respect all founders. But one thing that I definitely love to see is founders with a mission that essentially is seemingly headed towards a positive direction that benefits everyone in some ways. Yeah, good to see. By the way, speaking of seeing stuff, right before I hopped on here, I saw something come out from OpenAI. Are they trying to challenge the Claude? So OpenAI came out with ChatGPT Enterprise. I don't know what to say other than I saw this part, somewhat of it coming, but the form of it is interesting. So essentially, it looks like they're saying, "Hey, look, you can have your business and all your documents, and we are taking extra steps as far as protecting your data with enterprise grade privacy security." They've also become SOC 2 compliant, which is something that's a new compliance standard, especially amongst like larger enterprises. And yeah, I'm not sure where this goes, but they've removed all the limits for enterprise customers. And they've also allowed up to 32K context in comparison to what it is right now, which is much lower. I think it might be 8K context for the
It
current
is.
ChatGPT consumer product. So 32K is, I believe, nearly, it might be 10 pages or more that you can put into a context window and get context on, including the fact that you have your documents involved. So this seems like a very big deal. It just got released though, to my knowledge.
It's
Looks like you have
huge.
the context sales too. So yeah.
I, yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a
What do
massive,
y'all?
massive deal. Well, go ahead, brother.
Nah, I was gonna ask, what do you think it does to all those solutions that have popped up to fill that gap before this offering did exist?
In what way? Oh, are you talking about just
A lot of people, I feel like there was a ton of products that popped up geared at the enterprises, things of that nature,
Yeah,
and their whole thing was security.
yeah.
And so I'm just curious what happens to those
I think some of them would just be, just some will just die. But I think the bigger, I think the
yeah,
bigger opportunity though is just, yo, if you're like I'll say law firms for example. I think they were like one big category where the obvious use case was there. It's obvious to see how this technology can be useful to a law firm, but it was obvious as well why there would be hesitation from a law firm on wanting to use something like this, right? And so I think what this integrate or enterprise level technology does is it starts to make some of those more regulated use cases where again it's really obvious that it's incredibly useful and there's a lot of value to unlock from it just easier and more accessible. So for example, even if you aren't necessarily creating that company, like just helping law firms get this tool instituted within their law firms is incredibly valuable now, right? Because they would want it. So that's an incredibly valuable business. Or like healthcare businesses, again, who may, again, it's pretty easy to see how this could be probably useful in the context of a healthcare organization. But it's also easy to see why they wouldn't want to just give their data to anybody. So I think those opportunities are there. And then I think some of the smaller companies, I think they can still exist. This is a large market we're talking about. I think it's hard to even put a number on it because the healthcare space is a multi-trillion-dollar market. Education is a multi-trillion-dollar market. Legal is a multi-billion dollar. So all of these are separate markets. And so I think there can be thousands of players that win. But if you're talking about like companies that are at enterprise value, billion-dollar valuations, obviously not that many. But hell, if you can make $1 million a year offering this in a niche category to attorneys in Texas, I think that's a great business. So I wouldn't be too worried about the big players or whatnot.
for sure. It comes into yeah, for sure. That's a nuanced perspective. Considering the fact that one, like we've always said, venture backed is not the only way to go. That's not the only way to build a business. You can build some software and put it out into the world and charge for it. And it could be just that simple. And you could build it yourself or you could hire some people to do it. Doesn't matter exactly, but you have a lot more control as far as how you do it. So there's going to be many players that like are more tailored, like in the way that Dre is mentioning, towards specific niche cases that OpenAI may not necessarily tailor all the way to. And but as far as OpenAI as a company, huge move for sure. Interesting move because you still got to contact sales. I'm guessing that if your team it doesn't seem to be built for startups because the team is sizes are 1 to 50 is the first option. So it seems that you need to be sizable.
Mm.
It'd be interesting for them to have so they have what it seems like a more consumer, maybe professional product. Would be interesting to see maybe a small teams option.
That's so at towards the end of their blog post, they have that on their roadmap. And
Oh, that's good to know. That's good to know.
yeah,
That's good to
yeah.
know.
So what they're planning is one of the first things on their roadmap is customization. So being able to fine tune your experience based off the company's like data And they said here, by connecting the applications you already use. I'm actually curious by that. So does that mean it's going to be able to pull information from Stripe, QuickBooks, all those different places? And
Yeah.
then they said they do plan to roll out a chat GPT business self-service model. So those smaller teams can have access to this product. So yeah, those things are on their roadmap.
Yeah. Another thing that I feel the responsibility just to point out a little bit about as far as privacy, security, and compliance. One thing that is definitely very common within the last 5 years, for sure, especially when you're dealing with vendor contracts for large enterprises, they typically are looking for SOC 2 compliance. SOC 2 compliance can only be done by a certified public accountant. Don't ask me why that is, but essentially companies have built a business around giving company like new startups, but also companies SOC 2 compliance. And essentially, what they're doing is making sure the small things in the background um, you're doing, like just making sure that you're storing the data a certain way, et cetera. And I guess the accounting thing makes sense in the sense of like finance, but it's turned into something a little bit different considering the fact that security is not a security professional compliance. It's not security professional doing it. These are certified public accountants, by the way. So it's something just to note that although as far as the status quo is concerned, SOC 2 has been started becoming a standard. However, it's more so focused on people who work in finance, and they may not be necessarily looking at certain details. For example, it doesn't mean they're not safe, but it just means that when we think about OpenAI and we think about how they phrase privacy and security, we want to make sure that we actually truly understand what they mean by that. Because there's also, for example, I learned over the weekend, you can be HIPAA compliant without an audit. And HIPAA compliance is just like a trust-based system. There's no central agency that's checking for HIPAA compliance. So you can make an app tomorrow, Brylan, and you could say it's HIPAA compliant and have it on your website. Now, obviously, if you're not HIPAA compliant and you affect people, that's going to cost you, and you're going to get in trouble for that. However, there are a few levels of compliance, even FTC compliance, that don't require an external auditor. So I just want to make sure that's clear that when people think about sending information to OpenAI, this is something that we think about as safe because we are building an experimental AI product with OpenAI. And so when we think about the confidential information that we're sharing and how we're doing it, we often consider the level at which case they are actually not storing information per se and how they do it. And that's very difficult to do because they are pointing to pretty vague ones like SOC 2 compliance, et cetera. So I just want to put that out there that there's that. But generally speaking, though, it's a good sign when you see external security audits. It's a good sign when you see SOC 2. It's a good sign when you see HIPAA compliant, et cetera. But just always still remember, especially as people who are making products and delivering them with the assumption that everything's protected, that SOC 2 doesn't mean that they don't have your data. HIPAA doesn't mean that you're exactly protected. You could just be HIPAA. You could just be saying you're HIPAA compliant. The lawyers might have even told you that, and they might have been wrong. And so it could be as simple as that. So I just want people to know to keep that in mind.
So what I heard is it's not like a technical certification that
No,
folks are gotten.
no. So safe is in the middle. So SOC 2 is an overtime, multi-step process that happens over time. And it refreshes every year, which is the reason why you see a lot of new startups creating a business around it. Because it's almost like when you become a doctor and every amount of years you have to retest to get a certain level of certification. SOC 2 has some similarities in that regard. So they're essentially giving you this dashboard, and every dashboard is a little bit different, but essentially saying, hey, check this, make sure people are not sending this type of stuff. It's more of like guidelines. As far as technicality, there's nothing about technicality specifically as far as whether it's something's encrypted or not, or whether something is actually has to be deleted off a server, whether or not something has been stored in some way. Is very challenging as someone who is building again, in the startup space in security, because we want to offer products that are secure, but we also use OpenAI. And those are just things that we are concerned about. And so I just want to share those things and just so people know that expect that chats may be saved unintentionally, even unintentionally. Business secrets, trade secrets, anything, just assume I would assume that, and maybe in the future with maybe a little bit more track record and trust, we'll be able to see some of these things. But I just wanted to point out there are differences between compliance and multiple levels of compliance. But generally speaking, most consumers see HIPAA compliant and think, okay, I'm good. Or they see FCC compliant, they say, I'm good. They see SOC 2, they're like, okay, cool, like we're good. That doesn't mean you're good, is what I'm saying.
Mm.
Now, I
Yeah.
appreciate you, or appreciate you sharing that. I was not hip to that at all. One of the things that I wanted to call out that I found interesting about this, because I feel like the way OpenAI has released products, it almost foreshadows what is to come on like the consumer lens. And yeah, one piece of this was like obviously the unlimited access to GPT-4, so no caps there. And then also the speed of GPT-4 increasing. And then what they mentioned on their roadmap, like the fine tuning on your company data. So obviously it's the fine tuning of GPT-4.
Yes.
And I think that's really important because while we were on break, they did roll out, and I don't think it got as much hype as I thought it would, but they did roll out fine tuning for GPT 3.5. And so I think seeing them roll this out is signal to some extent of potential positive outcomes they're experiencing on the hardware side of things, because a lot of the caps and constraints that they have been putting around GPT-4 was due to the whole GPT, the GP constraints and things of that nature. And so
Yeah.
this is just very intriguing, because I'm like, oh shoot, so you're telling me sometime by the end
Yeah.
of this year we're gonna get fine tuning for GPT-4.
But here's the thing. They are getting so they're scaring me because the speed at which they're going. And let me explain why. And I get it, because this is a new groundbreaking thing. They're trying to move fast, move quick, and like one thing, as you were saying about fine tuning, first thought that came into my mind was that's a good defensive strategy for OpenAI. That's a high switching cost. Fine tuning in terms of fine tuning GPT-4, that's different than fine tuning a model that you found by yourself online through whatever source, Hugging Face, Reddit, or whatever. Like fine tuning GPT-4 or 5 or whatever it is. It's a benefit, but it does create a nice defensible strategy as far as switching costs. Because you fine tune specifically the GPT-4 model, it's not going to be easy for you to switch over that fine tuning to another model that might even be better than GPT-4 or GPT-5 or whatever is out. And the reason I think maybe
I would push
go ahead.
back against that.
Why? Go ahead. What's the question?
The reason why I would push back against that is one, just like when I think of like the cost associated with GPT-4, right? So if you're going to use the 8K model, it's 3 cents for all the input tokens, and then it's 6 cents for all the output tokens. And what we saw with GPT 3.5 is, I think I'm probably going to say this wrong, but I think they either 10x, it was either 10x or 100x the cost for the fine-tuned model. So why wouldn't those costs go up as well for GPT-4? And I think the other thing too is, if the training methods for these models were different, then I think there might be an argument for like the switching costs. But I feel like for a model that is probably at similar performance, and you're telling me all I got to do is have that CSV file with the 2 columns, and what I plugged in, I don't have to come up with a whole new data set that I trained GPT-4. I can do that for this open source. I think you're gonna see people doing that. And a company that I came across that's making it easier on the open source side.
Let me ask you a question. Are you pushing back on the idea that your fine tuning might need to change depending on the model that you're using, or what specifically are you pushing back on?
I don't think I don't think there's any competitive moat for OpenAI when it comes to fine tuning, especially given their whole thing is we're committed not to using your data to train our model. Unless there's some nuance of, the data you fine tune with, we're not going to use to train our model, but maybe there's some nuanced detail around like the output.
What do you think? What do you think, Dre?
No, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Yeah, I think in the way that you explained it, Brylan, if it is as simple as like, using the same data input method on the customer side, like you said, organizing it in a column and then just exporting a CSV. If it's literally that simple, then no, there's not much high switching costs that I can really
Oh,
see.
okay, got you. Understood.
Yeah. Are y'all
Understood.
are y'all familiar
Understood.
with Together AI?
Let me speak to
No.
that. That just came up, but let me speak to something real quick. I think I see what you're saying as far as if you're talking about big players, et cetera, maybe. But like when I run a local model, or for example, I have 6 different local models, right? When I think of fine tuning, I guess maybe the definition of fine tuning we would have to be on the same page about per se, because every model that I have responds differently to a set of instructions, and but also like the prompts and the user prompts, et cetera, the custom instructions, et cetera. But also like different like tweaks. So I guess it's just from my perspective, if you have created if you have built a large business around ChatGPT and fine tuning it in a way that ChatGPT gives you the results that are best for your business, but at some point you decide, hey, there's this other model, for example, like to me that doesn't seem as like you just drop a CSV, because the models that I'm currently loading up right now, they don't load that way. They're just open source. They're just open source models that anybody can run on the computer. So what like with that, so we're talking about, so maybe when we're talking about maybe some different things, you're almost talking about like a product that maybe like if Claude, let's say Claude had fine tuning and ChatGPT had fine tuning, maybe it is as simple as transferring over CSVs, et cetera, and there's no switching costs. But what I'm seeing is this push by Meta to push out tons of open source, and I use the latest Llama model on Centric, but I also use a lot of other different models that are some censored, some are not, and the way that you them to get the response that you want is different, highly variable on the model. So that's what I'm speaking to per se as far as switching costs, because if you're looking, but that's
But what's the
local
time
model
spent?
made.
But what's the time spent on that though? Because
Hi.
I think regardless of if it's rather, let's say it's not a CSV, right? But let's just say to your point, it is custom configuration. Is that a week? Obviously, it's hard to like hours in that, but like, I'm just saying, what's the complexity or uphill battle that you got to do that? Because if you're talking about
Yeah,
a week worth of
yeah,
output, for example, hypothetically, I'm just throwing out an arbitrary number here.
yeah,
Then
yeah,
yeah, I would still
yeah.
stand on the same side of like switching costs is relatively low. If you're talking about like
Yes, yeah.
ripping something out, for example, I read this article about companies that are trying to like migrate from COBOL, like one of the first
Mhm,
programming languages, to like
mhm,
Java. That's high switching
yeah,
costs because that's a ton of
yeah,
COBOL code that you got to convert
sure,
over. Like,
sure,
so
yeah.
I guess it depends on what's the on ramp of that switching cost.
So it really depends, and that's why I think it depends on what we are saying fine tuning is, like clearly defining fine tuning. Let me share a screen real quick if I can here of LM Studio. It allows you to load up. If I can pull this up, for some reason I don't see LM Studio here. I know I have it up, so I can show you guys just a little bit of maybe what I'm seeing here. Okay, here on Studio, you can see that I have maybe 6 different models, right? A lot of these models, by the way, like just to try 6, like they're all different parameters. Some of them are 30 billion, some are 65, some are smaller. New Llama models are smaller, which means that people who have more like less processing speed can run them. But what I found is that when I look at, let's say I'm loading this model right here, what I found is that there are tons of different presets, for example, for the model, but you can also customize it depending on what it is. But then on top of that, you can go even deeper and speak to the model configuration, which will show you more of the randomness, the amount of words, depending on it, or just more of the specifics. So I guess what I'm talking about is that if you have tuned it to maybe the level that like that is on a local model, it may be a little it might be a little time consuming, but it might not be. Maybe there's some tools that make that easier or something like that in the future. But based on what I'm using, like on through all these different models, I'm like, I can see a world where I can train a model. I guess I need the picture of the how the fine tuning looks. And
Hmm.
hopefully it is as simple as, for example, like changing your phone over to like a Google phone or whatever, or et cetera. But
Yeah.
right now it seems like pretty it can get pretty specific depending on how you look at it.
Nah, so what I would say to that, it is that simple. So just so we're speaking the same language. When I speak of fine tuning, I'm not talking about adjusting like the hyperparameters, so the
Okay.
random, like the temperature, the
Understood.
top
Understood.
P, all that.
hmm
I'm talking about just introducing new behavior. And as we spoke about before on the podcast,
hmm
behavior in the context of AI is output, like
Yeah.
getting the output to be exactly what you want. So OpenAI, the way they do that, if you want to fine tune it, is literally a CSV with 2 columns. This is what your prompt is, and this is what the ideal outcome is. You can have anywhere, like typically they recommend having at least 50 examples before the AI can really learn those different patterns in those different responses. But all the other LLMs are very similar. And I think the important part that I would call out between what you were just showing with LM Studio is the compute piece. So all those open source models you're running locally. So
hmm
imagine if a company takes those open source models and does exactly what OpenAI is doing and puts it on, builds these crazy data centers and supercomputers that they can do. And so the companies that are doing that is obviously Hugging Face is one, where Hugging Face will sell you compute for the open source model, and you can literally train it as similar to how you train GPT 3.5. But another one that I came across is called Together AI. And
hmm
so the interesting thing about Together AI, and this is why I'm like, I don't personally think fine tuning is much of a moat, is because it's all going to come down to pricing. If I'm going to keep it a stack to you, and as I mentioned before, if you fine tune GPT 3.5, your costs actually go up, and it's nothing crazy, but it goes up to about 2 cents. Where if you were to fine tune on Together.ai and fine tune the Llama 2 model, it's literally 3/1000ths of a penny. Those are drastic costs.
So
1
we're
cent is
it's
still
like
1 cent, but
yeah. It's
the
just that we had
costs
a
are
different
different.
definition. We had a
Mm.
different definition of fine tuning because, for example, if you change one of those super specific manual configurations, you might get a result that's a lot more creative but less accurate. Or, for example, or things of
Yeah,
that nature.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, like, so I'm speaking to when I thought fine tuning, my mind went
To
to
me, that yeah,
to almost like the if I'm like really fine, maybe not necessarily
yeah, yeah,
production fine, but
yeah. When it comes to AI, they call those the hyperparameters. And so like people are going to adjust the hyperparameters as they see fit for their output. But
mhm,
in terms of the data piece, like training a model on your data, people are going where it costs the least. And the thing about it too, this is part of the reason why OpenAI, I think, is rushing to do a lot of these different things, such as the enterprise,
yeah,
et
they're
cetera,
definitely Russian.
be, because their business is vulnerable. And the reason why it's vulnerable is because there's a reason why they didn't want to release the technical details of GPT-4. And when I forgot his name, but when Homie, who was part of the Red Hat and he's an AI engineer or whatever, on the Lex Freeman podcast, told everybody that GPT-4 is basically a collection. It's a mixture. It's called a mixture of experts. So MOE, it's called a mixture of expert model. And so it has close to 1 trillion parameters or whatever. But the way it got there is you got GPT-4 and it's made up of all these subsystems that are 70 to 100 billion parameters. So it's made up of 10 to
Yeah.
15 different models.
I peeped that. I peeped that. I peeped that. I
Hmm.
peeped that. No, that's actually a good point. I peeped
So,
that. They're finding the
so
best. Like people don't realize they're like when you put in a query on, for example, on ChatGPT right now. Yeah, like Brylan said, there's like a bunch of models that they're using, and then, for example, it may route your query to the best model for that
yes,
particular task.
it's the router.
Yeah,
But hold on.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is why Llama is very important, because
yeah.
Llama just showed that a 70 billion parameter model, once fine tuned, well, not even fine tuned, is up there with Chat GPT 3.5.
And
So
it's
now
open.
what? Now guess what? If Meta wants to build GPT-4 and we're saying GPT-4 is just made up of all these 70 billion, they just proved that. And so trust me, Meta is going to roll out a GPT-4 level model, if
Oh,
not
I
by
mean, I
the end
think
of the year,
that. I think
sometime,
so. I think so. I
So
because
mean,
what do
it's that new technique.
what do
yeah.
you think? So what do you think OpenAI's strategy should be? Because you mentioned that it doesn't seem like they have much defensibility right now, at least in the fine tuning space. So do you think there's anything unique to OpenAI that they have? Like any unique advantage that they might have in the marketplace when you compare them to Facebook or Google, or do you think it's pretty the same?
It's I feel like what Rodney just said. It's speed. I would say it's speed, and part of it is team, and then part of it is mindset. Because you got these folks moving like a traditional startup and not a traditional research firm, that's what matters. And the thing about it is, as long as they can keep telling the story of, hey, we're generating a lot of demand, they can keep getting those GPUs first from NVIDIA, because there's always going to be some type of supply constraint.
Yeah, but isn't this, Brylan, you're getting ready to be a scout, right? So put the investor hat on.
Yep.
Walk with me through this as just an investment. Doesn't this seem like a pure race to zero? Does this not seem like a race to the bottom? Am I missing something here?
Yes. No, you're not. You're not. You're not.
So then what did Microsoft
OpenAI is
do
an
with that?
acquisition play.
So why would Microsoft put $10 billion to them though? They have to believe that do you believe that investment is just purely off of future enterprise value that maybe OpenAI can capture? Because maybe like this enterprise plan, maybe they'll be able to get broad distribution with this enterprise plan, capture some enterprise value. Because otherwise, how do you justify the $10 billion exit if everybody is racing to zero in terms of cost of goods and in terms of like just pricing?
I think Microsoft knows what they're going to get out of it. I think I think in the bigger picture, I think they looked at it, either we win both or we win one. And it's like the one is like we get all this enterprise value, brand new products integrated through all these different things on all this technology that this hot startup and talented startup is building. But then the extra one is, look, if they can survive this crazy bloodbath, then we also get something off that too. You know what I'm saying? So I think they almost looked at it like, I think they looked at it almost like there's no risk.
I'm actually curious to understand how much of the money that Microsoft invested, how much they've recouped just through OpenAI having to pay them for their data centers. To be honest.
Yeah.
And like how much of that actually came in just credits?
Probably a lot. I'm gonna make a wild bet. I'm gonna make a wild bet here and this is a crazy bet, right? And my bet is only going back to the fact that we can't, and I brought this up before on another long episode before. We cannot forget the fact that Microsoft is a savage when it comes to enterprise software and when it comes to locking people into their ecosystem and when it comes to just like being a pure monopoly. They are one of few companies that have been successfully sued by the DOJ for practicing monopoly behavior. Successfully sued, by the way. They lost that case. So let's just say, for example, $10 billion in the grand scheme is nothing to Microsoft for the one case of making it appear that they are not operating a monopoly, when in fact they are actually operating a monopoly.
Yeah, exactly.
They're just disguising it a little bit differently this time, right? Because what Microsoft seems to be doing is investing in everybody, right? And so when the case from the government comes and looks at Microsoft and looks at how they're approaching AI, which is this new frontier, Microsoft is just going to say, hey, we've invested in all these companies. We've helped spread out, our competitive landscape by essentially allowing other companies to compete, because that's one of the next frontiers for like lawmakers that's challenging like these monopolistic behavior. Is really like historically antitrust has always been about consumer pricing. That's been like the reason why the antitrust thing even came about, was always making sure that consumers' pricing was fair. But what has started to happen now, and what Microsoft is really hedging, is that now the next level of antitrust needs to be around competition for companies, because that hasn't really been a part of the antitrust rhetoric yet. And that's why Amazon is being looked at as well, because Amazon is being assessed and saying, hey, Amazon is making it harder for anybody to start an e-commerce company now. It's not about customer pricing anymore. It's about the fact that they're making it hard for the marketplace in general. And so I think this question of 10 billion, when I really look at like Microsoft and their history, I would say, and this is just a pure speculation here, that Microsoft is operating the same way that they have been in terms of seeking the monopoly, but the way they're doing it is just differently. And so now the government can't come back to them and say, you're stopping competition or stifling competition. No, they can say, no,
Yeah.
we're actually enabling competition, helping these companies compete. We're
With the
funding them,
Apple,
we're putting our
with
money.
OpenAI.
But exactly. But at the end of the day,
Yeah.
Microsoft is going to turn around and recapture hundreds of billions of dollars in enterprise value
Tons.
from embedding this technology and deploying it in their traditional way. So this $10 billion at the end of the day is just to keep the government off their backs for the next 50 years so that they can capture the market. That's my crazy bet.
OpenAI, I feel like it's not crazy. I feel like it's methodical and logical. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think it's based off of past trends and knowing how the company has operated in the past. And like you mentioned, it's not like they beat a bunch of DOJ cases. They had to break up some stuff because of the anti-competitive behaviors that they had. And yeah, maybe I'm wrong about the fine tuning, but in my mind, I'm thinking Microsoft, OpenAI, I'm thinking they have some defensibility, and I see it's hard for me not to look at some of these things as like the dependence on these products as far as the enterprises. You're not going to be able to. I don't know. I have this feeling. I don't know how they'll do it, but you're not going to be able to. I don't believe you'll be able to switch from the way they'll have it set up. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm speculating, so this is not facts. But I don't believe they'll have an easy way for you to change your enterprise stuff over to another customer. But I'm willing to stand corrected if that happens to be the case.
Yeah,
But
that could be
I don't
true.
believe that they'll make it easy to do that.
Man, the real winner here is NVIDIA, man. God, that might be one of the
Oh
greatest.
yeah.
I actually,
And
I heard,
in the
Need the
next
research.
era.
Need to
But go
find
ahead.
I heard this interesting thought that said NVIDIA is winning right now, but in the long term, they may not actually be the winner.
I heard that.
Just when it
Who's
went,
the other one?
it was because like there's opportunity.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of companies popping up who are building specific chips just for these AI models.
AMD.
We have to remember that these are traditional gaming devices that happen to be discovered that they can be applied to.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And also they were talking about how this caught NVIDIA off guard because that's part of the reason there's a shortage. They didn't anticipate this at all.
Yeah.
And
Let's
so
not skip
I mean,
the detail
that-
you mentioned. Let's not
that
skip
may
the
be
detail you
true.
mentioned,
Hold
though,
on.
bro. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead,
Go
Rodney.
ahead, Dre. My bad.
I'll just say that may very well be true, but I will say we can't ignore the competitive head start they have because like designing and manufacturing chips is not the same as like writing like basic software and like deploying an iOS app. It ain't the same. It's not even nowhere near the same. And it's oversimplifying really what NVIDIA has done because beyond chips, they've like essentially built a vertical integrated stack, really. So it's not even just chips, it's software, it's so much more than that, than just the chip itself. So not to oversimplify it or not to even complicate it, I'm just saying in general, I think they have a huge head start. Whether or not they maintain it is up to them. Just like Intel.
Yeah.
Intel had arguably a head start as well.
Yeah,
And they
had a
didn't
huge
necessarily
head start.
seem to capture it.
And they fumbled it with Apple. Apple, they had a long, nice deal with Apple, and they fumbled that with Apple.
They fumbled it.
And they were to do different. They could have. Let me speak to something like specifically that Brylan said that's important. They just so happened to have these super GPUs that were for gaming, etc., and that could be applied in this way. Now, like as somebody who I think I've built 3 to 5 computers in my lifetime, and I remember each time you get the motherboard, you get the RAM, and you get the video card, right? Video card, and you get the CPU, obviously, Intel, AMD, you know, it was like preference or whatever. Some would argue AMD, some would argue Intel. That was a whole nerd debate. But I remember a GPU just being a GPU. It was your video card. So like you would get a GPU because you wanted great graphics. Like you wanted really good graphics. You wanted to have the nice monitor. And so I never once it never occurred to me that level of processing could be used in any other way than to display graphics. It never occurred to me. And I was like, I like Jay said, it's way different than building an app or building software. I bought pieces that were already made. Okay. I bought pieces that I already made and put them in the right place. And I'm still blown away by that. But they have a crazy head start. If I were them, I would be trying to make as many as possible, but also basically funneling a lot towards just bigger and better chips. You know what I'm saying?
Since we talked about high switching costs, that actually seems like maybe a high switching cost investment, right? Because if you're a data center or
No, that
whoever
can't switch that. Yeah,
purchases
can't switch that.
NVIDIA chips, right? And you start building
Yeah.
everything because again, NVIDIA owns the
Yeah.
language, the architecture, everything around their chip. If you start integrating into that, that's not hard to back out of. So I get like all these other chip
Yes.
makers are coming up, but yeah, they've approached it so strategically that I think they deserve. I think they deserve credit for their build, how they've done it. Even though again, they didn't create the demand, but they had the right product, they
Yes.
had the right team, all the right pieces to be able to capture like this big spike. And so I think that's just remarkable because not everybody would have been able to do that,
Yeah, their revenue
Yes.
growth numbers have been crazy.
bro.
Yeah.
Oh my
Well,
God.
yeah,
Just
I
it's
bet.
remarkable,
I
bro.
bet.
If I'm the founder, he needs to start selling some stock. I know how that look, bro. Like, I have to take some chips off the table, but I know how that might look.
It looks how it's supposed to look. Like we up right now, and look like we may not have been. This is a moment. This is a moment in history. It's probably one of the biggest moments. This is probably one of one of their biggest company moments. Like they've been around for a while though, but I'm guessing this is
Yeah.
one of their biggest moments in a while because the way I saw them for the longest time was just like maybe just enthusiasts making computers like myself or whatever, gaming computers that you just want to have. Or whatever, or maybe even they're in the Xbox or in the PlayStation. But in this way, in the data center, oh yeah, they're locked in.
Crazy.
You buy $100 million worth of those, you're not switching that easily.
No.
You're either building on top of it or you're passing it down at a
Whew.
discount. And yeah, there's costs with that.
But speaking of stock and wins, I want to briefly touch on what's going on with Instacart. I don't know if y'all been keeping up with the news, but
Yeah.
over the past week, or at least in the past 2 weeks, they filed to go public. Have y'all used Instacart? Are y'all currently users of the product at all?
I used to use it when I was in
Occasionally.
Atlanta.
Occasionally.
You said you used to use it, Brylan. You don't use it anymore.
Yeah, I don't use it anymore because I'm a block away from the grocery store. But when I was in
I see.
Atlanta and I had to hop in the car,
Yeah.
go to
Yeah.
the I Instacarted everything.
Yeah. I used to use it as well. Like when we first moved to San Francisco, we used Instacart and we used like Amazon Fresh. It was just way more convenient. We didn't have cars. So
Yes.
it was like heaven sent. But I've been following Instacart for the past 10 years, actually. They've been around for 10 years. So they started in 2013. And quick story, Rodney, I don't know if you remember this, but back in 2013, you and I had a conversation. And it was at the time when we were trying to decide like what we were going to work on. And I don't even know if like we had landed on-demand delivery yet or not. But I remember in particular, there was one conversation we had. We were on the phone for hours. And we were talking about this idea of being able to walk into a grocery store and being able to pick up an item off the shelf and just walk out. And you don't have to pay.
Yeah.
Everything's paid for, like essentially what Amazon Go is right now. We were thinking about that in like 2013.
Yeah.
The only thing that stopped
Yeah.
us from going on it was like hardware. We didn't understand hardware technology at that point. We was only doing software.
Yeah.
So we couldn't quite figure out how to get the hardware going. But that conversation like led me down like a research hole, and Instacart had popped up and they had just got founded that same year, and they happened to go through YC. And so because we were talking about grocery space, I was like, oh, okay, this interesting grocery delivery company. We were doing on-demand delivery. So it was some synergies between what they were doing around that time. But I obviously have not forgotten about them, and they've obviously gone on to be incredibly successful. But they just filed to go public, and I wanted to just talk about it a little bit because the public markets for stock companies have been dry for the past 2 years. So the last tech company to go public, I think, was in 2021. So it's been a huge dry spurt. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Instacart because I think they're interesting. And then I think in general, because this is Market Mondays, I'm not here to give investment advice to anybody. But I think if I'm putting my money into companies that are locking down the future, this is one of those companies that I would highly take a look at. And I'm going to tell you why I would take a look at it. But again, I'm not here to give investment.
Hold up. And another cheat code. When it comes to these companies that are about to hit the public stock market, you want to wait 3 to 6 months.
Yep.
Because typically the employees, they're locked up for a certain period of time and the price drops dramatically once they have the opportunity to take some cash off the table.
Yeah,
Yep.
as they should.
Exactly. And actually, Brylan, you were spot on. The lockup period I read in the S1, I think, is like 6 months for their team. So yeah, you're absolutely right about that. So
I'll be
yeah,
sweating.
so
I'll be sweating.
Man,
If I
so
was
interesting.
employed like 50, I'd be sweating bullets.
Man, gotta be for real. And what's crazy is like the valuation has come down quite a bit. At its peak, Instacart was valued at $39 billion. $39 billion. Right now, they're trying to go public and they're trying to seek a valuation of $10 billion. So they're significantly smaller right now than what they were. And we know that, right? Like we know at some point investors were just dumping cash into a ton of companies. We all worked
Yeah.
at companies or been at companies associated with companies that have had inflated valuations that we all will look at each other and scratch our head and be like, how the hell is this worth that much? It can't quite be. So now the valuation is much more realistic to where it actually should be based on what its revenues and profits are. So for those who don't know, if you never used it before, Instacart is a grocery delivery app that's been around since 2013 that enables customers to essentially browse and purchase food from grocery stores. These are very popular grocery stores, whether it be a Walmart, Kroger's. They've been around for, again, like I said, the last 10 years. And so they built up some enormous partnerships. And then recently they launched a second business, which is their advertising business, which I'll talk about a little bit, because that business is actually growing pretty big. And so just in terms of scale, just so you have some idea of like how big Instacart is, in 2022, the gross transaction volume. So gross transaction volume is a metric used by marketplaces to measure how much transaction volume, like dollar volume amount, is actually being put through the system. How much are people actually purchasing? So in 2022, there was $28.8 billion of transactions that went through Instacart's system. That means customers purchased almost $29 billion worth of groceries, essentially from Instacart. In 2019, that number was about $5 billion. So the number has gone up significantly. So from 2019 to go from $5 billion to 2022 to be at almost $30 billion, that's almost a 5x, over a 5x multiples. That's a pretty substantial growth. And I think a lot of that was fueled by COVID, but whether or not, it's still pretty good growth. Revenues went up as well. So their revenue went up from 1.8 billion in 2021 to 2.5 billion in 2022. So their revenue went up almost 40%. Wow. Profit also went up as well. In 2022, they did a profit of about $428 million. That's up from a loss of 73 million. So the year before that, they had a loss of 73 million. Last year, they had a net gain, a net profit of almost 500 million. So they've been able to shrink their losses and improve their unit economics pretty well. Another metric in terms of scale is how many stores are they in. So right now, they're in 80,000 U.S. grocery stores. That covers about 85% of the U.S. market. And what I think is most interesting about Instacart, and I can talk about all these numbers and whatnot, but what's most interesting about Instacart is that I find is that to be a startup, and I would consider them a startup, even though it's been 10 years, I would still consider them to be a startup because it's not until recently that they've been able to make the unit economics work. And so until you do that, you're not a real business yet. And so now they can be considered a real business now. And so what's interesting to me, and I think the advantage they have is the scale that they've been able to reach this early in the journey in terms of the business journey, because 10 years again is small compared to the partners they're working with. These are 100-year-old grocery brands that have been around for a very long time. And so for them to be in over 80,000 stores, covering almost 85% of US groceries is pretty significant. Another number too to compare it to is only 14% of groceries is actually purchased online. Only 14%. So it is a very small percentage of groceries that are actually purchased online. Groceries in the US accounts for almost $1 trillion in market value, meaning there are almost $1 trillion worth of groceries that are purchased just in the US alone. And only 14% of that is online. So as more of that supply or demand becomes online, like consumers have more of an appetite to order their groceries online, that market for Instacart really starts to expand without them having to do much, right? They don't necessarily need to acquire more merchants to necessarily do that. And so the unit economics, I think, start to really look in their favor. One of the risks, though, that I saw from this was that like 43% of their revenue right now, though, or 43% of that gross transaction volume, that almost $30 billion I spoke to, comes from three of their top 3 retailers that they work with. So 3 of their customers drive almost half of their marketplace value. That's obviously risky, right? So that might be like Walmart or Kroger's, for example, or like Publix. Those are major grocery chains. And so they have a little bit of a risk there. But the reality is, just because of the way the US is set up, 68% of the US grocery market is owned by 20 of the 20 grocers. So that's pretty heavily skewed towards a few number of players anyway. So yes, there's risk there, but that's just the nature of that market. And as long as they can continue to provide value and not ever become a threat to their supply side, so not ever try to be going to the private label business, I think they will do fairly well. And yeah, I think Instacart is a stock that people should look at. Again, I'm not here to give investment advice, but as you think about what the future will look like, more grocery purchases will happen online. Grocery brands will need technology, and grocery brands will have to make a choice on whether or not it makes sense to build or whether it makes sense to integrate. And so most likely they're probably going to integrate like they do with all their other systems, because they're not building their own POS systems and all the other inventory tracking. They're using third-party software. And so, yeah, I think this is a very good, potentially good buy. And then the last thing I'll say too, I love vertical software companies. I think the level of focus they have, the level of competitive dominance they have, and the long-term market value that they can build for shareholders is immense. I'd probably do a whole like deep dive eventually on like vertical market software companies, but they are incredibly valuable and they build incredible long-term value. And so this is the biggest player in the grocery technology space. So yeah, I think people should definitely take a look at it.
Instacart needs to get their props for being able to stand on their own 10 toes in this very competitive on demand market, regardless of whether it's hour delivery or grocery store delivery. We have to salute that. That's a big deal. Going from losses of nearly 100 million to upwards of 400 million is not something to sleep on at all. And I think I agree with Dre regards to when they mentioned the risk. I think that I agree with Dre is the way to address that is the value that you provide to these people, to those companies, those three major ones that are to make it just as easy as possible for them to integrate so they don't see the need or want to build out this entire infrastructure that Instacart has built. I also want to tell an anecdote from literally maybe like 2 or 3 days ago. Yeah, I've typically do online the delivery. It has changed over time. It's like when me and Dre was living together, it was Instacart. A little bit of that also when I was in LA, but then also I do Amazon Fresh. But I actually decided to go to Amazon Fresh in person because they have one down the street from where I live. It's first time ever being in there. One of the reasons why I did that was because you can pick up packages in there too. So they store your packages as whatnot. So it's like a double thing. But here was the interesting experience. I walked in, and by the way, I've been to the Whole Foods too, which is a different experience. But Amazon Fresh, you walk in, and they're like these high tech, like shopping carts. Like there are these high tech shopping carts, and then they come up to you and they say, "Hey, do you want to try the new like shopping experience or something like that?" And essentially, you hook your app up to the cart. It's very difficult to describe exactly how it went because it was. I'm not gonna lie, it was so brand new. I'm like just blown away by it. But these cards, they connect to your Amazon account, and then while you're shopping, you scan the items as they're putting them in the cart. So they're automatically like being added to your cart as you're shopping. And I thought that was a crazy thing. I think there are many improvements that they can make alongside of it. But basically, by the time that you're done, and I'm guessing they also have some weight sensors in these things or whatever. But it almost felt like I was driving like my own little mini go-kart with like I don't know, like like a bunch of like technology. But and then when you check out, there's a special lane specifically for people with those cards. And you walk through it, and there's still some kinks, and I don't know if it's at every Amazon Fresh, but there's a payment it will be like ding, and it'll tell you everything went well or whatever the case. In that case, it said that, but then there was an issue with maybe one of my payment methods, which could have been from travel. Who knows what it was? But either way, there's still some kinks to be ironed out. However, I thought that it was a very interesting way to shop in person because I do believe that the number is going to increase by a large margins, which makes Instacart very good. And I don't necessarily see Amazon Fresh as a direct competitor, really. 'Cause I just think that there are people that are going to maintain their habits of shopping in person, but they're going to make it easier. But one thing that was weird though was that they wouldn't let you take the cart that you shop with outside of the store, which
Where was this
like
at?
this was in it's a certain look. It's in Westchester near Inglewood. um, take what you want from that. I don't know if they do this at every location. Um, um, but at this location, you cannot take the cart outside, which I thought was strange because I would have rather had just. It was cool to try it and whatnot, but
Mm.
me and my girlfriend would have rather had just took the cart and picked our stuff and then
But that
had it
make
checked out as
that
usual.
makes it. That card is probably worth like a few $1,000s though.
Oh, why it makes
So
sense. I know why it makes sense. I know,
so
but
I
at least
mean,
have a way so that have a concierge or something because
yeah,
there was no bags. There was no
yeah.
bags. I was like, so we were just supposed to just
Uh,
transfer. Yeah, it was still it was like giving almost Aldi type. I didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. You know what I'm saying? And granted, I can't speak for every Amazon Fresh. I only speak to the one that I went to down like Sentinel, Inglewood,
mm,
etc. I can speak to that. You know what I'm saying? But it was
mm.
intriguing to see basically they're basically lowering cashiers from my perspective because it's almost like you only need. We saw it as walk in and walk out, and I see that in the airport. I see that in the airport now where Amazon has like walk in and walk out, which is crazy. But with these fresh stores, it's seeming like they're trying to put like maybe 3 regular manual lanes, which suggests that they don't want that many cashiers, and they want maybe more of a concierge type of shopping experience. Interested to see where that goes, but yeah, but it's different than Whole Foods, and I see how Whole Foods was advantageous for them to buy because you can check out Whole Foods with the handprint and everything, just like how you can do at Amazon Fresh.
I had this epiphany the other day.
Yeah,
Whole Foods was such a phenomenal
yeah,
buy for
amazing.
Amazon
It was amazing.
outside of just the getting into
Yeah,
groceries,
big
Mhm.
move.
but it was returns.
Huge
Mm.
move.
Yeah.
Like the
Huge
fact
move.
that yeah, I won't
Huge
go
move.
down that whole rabbit hole,
Just
but
a huge move.
yeah. So I'm just looking at this S1 and there's a few things that I find very intriguing. Obviously, people do what they need to arrive at their own buy and sell decisions when it comes to stocks. But when I'm looking at a stock, I personally subscribe to figuring out what is a price too high for me. This might be a good business, but if it's priced more than what I think it's valued for, I'm not buying it, just to be honest with you. And so the thing that it has even caught my attention here is in their S1, they talk about the average monthly orders per active order. And they've been able to build this out over years, tracking the cohorts. And so typically folks who are using Instacart in their first year, they're purchasing 2 times, using Instacart 2 times a month. But when you start to get in those year 5, year 6, now it's 4 times a month. And now you're spending double the money. This is very intriguing. And even when I'm looking at the numbers for like their brand partners, like it's such a new business for them. The fact that they went from having 1,000 brand partners from in year 1 to then tripling that to now even doubling that, man, this is a very attractive business just based off of kind of what I'm seeing, man. It's
Very.
I ain't
think they
ran the
should try.
numbers yet to know what my
I think
price
they.
is, but
But
I think they should try to
and we
retrofit companies. Like I think they should try to retrofit their biggest those 3 that Dre mentioned. I think they should try to build the technology that Amazon seems to be building with Amazon Fresh specifically, and somehow make it easy for those businesses to retrofit. Because I could see for example, a separate lane for Instacart shopping, or just there's a few things I could see. But if I'm Instacart, I might try to, I might dabble in the hardware and trying to figure out if we can integrate some hardware is makes the shopping easier. There's a running joke on Twitter where I've seen a lot of women say when they see a man Instacart shopper, they cancel it because of the detail. It's like a joke. It's like the detail, like he might get a certain type of spice and replace it, whatever. And so they wait. So, to take on
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure they are working on
yeah,
that because I read in the S1 that
probably,
they are working on fulfillment technology. They mention a lot about AI and machine learning. So like that, those will
yeah,
be like where those use cases make the most sense. I think in
Yeah.
terms of valuation, Brylan, I think that we actually got a really good valuation cut in the private markets naturally, right? Because it was valued at 40 billion, which was way overvalued. Now they're more valued at $10 billion.
Yeah.
And so when I think about this company that's probably on a run rate to do $1 billion in profit, by the way, in a space where only 14% of customers are actually engaging with this market. When I think about that, I think that a $10 billion valuation is actually really low. Maybe even a $50 billion valuation is really low as well if you think about it over the course of the next 10 years. Can Instagram be worth more than 10 billion over the next 10 years? Yeah, I would say so. Just given like all the other competitive advantages they have. Again, these are all assumptions, but as we think about like how to think about price and like valuation, like I think if you look out on a longer time horizon, like almost any number can make sense for them because they have such a competitive moat to where, let's say, Uber did have the same thing, but Lyft didn't have that necessarily. And then I'll say the other thing too is compare it to DoorDash and Uber, which oftentimes analysts will compare all these marketplaces to. They're actually profitable going public. Neither DoorDash or Uber or Lyft were actually profitable when they went public. And Instacart is profitable and it's at a much lower, more reasonable valuation than those companies were. So I think the unit economics are just way better for Instacart.
Yeah, I can see that. Is there a world that somebody, any of the big guys and girls are interested in buying Instacart? Is there a world, maybe a Meta
I
or
would.
something, or like you said you would?
Oh yeah, somebody definitely should buy them for sure,
I got you.
100%.
Yeah.
If I'm
It's a
a
matter
if
of
I'm a
who. It's a
grocery,
matter of who.
exactly. If I'm one of the I don't know if a grocery brand could do it though. I don't know if a Walmart could
Yeah, I don't think
necessarily do
so.
it. But if I'm like an Amazon, I think Amazon should take a look at it.
What are you talking
Anybody,
about?
Instacart.
Instacart.
Like he said, will somebody acquire Instacart?
Hmm.
Yeah. To buy
Yeah.
them for $10 billion right now or $15 billion right now is nothing. That gets you instantly access to 80,000 stores, right? That instantly gets you access to almost half a billion dollars in profit, right? It gets you quite a bit. Honestly, I think it's pretty low. I think it's pretty low.
I ain't even gonna cap the subsidies. Think about how Amazon would potentially subsidize like costs to drive up adoption of Instacart.
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, I know what you mean. I see. What you
Same
mean there.
same way they did with Prime Video.
Yeah.
Wrap it all into your
They have the cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, speaking of Prime Video, I saw it really briefly before hopping on that ESPN is having conversations with them. Prime Video.
With
So they're trying
Prime?
to bundle ESPN with Prime. What do y'all think about that?
What? Okay. Let's rewind a little bit. From what I know, ESPN is Disney. That's where I want to start. ESPN is associated with Disney. Now, if I'm wrong about that, then let me move forward. The second thing is that ESPN, what are they looking? So they need more distribution. Is Disney not giving them, or like what? Where's this coming from? I thought ESPN was fine. I'm not gonna lie, cause I thought they were fine.
So let me
I didn't
break down how distribution works for this. Yes, you're right. ESPN is owned by Disney, but Disney is not a distribution network. Disney is a studio, a TV production studio. So all Disney does is it has content and then they need to take it to distributors to get it distributed and then they monetize that distribution, right? So historically, Disney has taken ESPN to cable networks like Comcast, like DirecTV, all these other players, and worked out specific network contracts with them to distribute ESPN channel on their networks. And then they monetize the ad space that gets created from ESPN channel. So when you're watching First Take on ESPN and it go to ad break, ESPN rather is monetizing that ad hours or viewership time essentially, and they can fill it with whatever they want. The problem is because over the last couple of years, less people are subscribing to Comcast. Less people are subscribing to DirecTV.
Yeah.
Less people are subscribing to that. So subscribers for ESPN went from 100 million to 70 million, and now they're projected to be at 50 million in the next 3 years. So they're declining
Mm.
rapidly. And so when you have less viewers that are subscribed to ESPN or watching ESPN content, that means ESPN cannot charge as much for the ad space that runs through their segments. That means the price per advertising goes down, right? Because now if I'm an advertiser, I'm not going to pay you as much because you don't have as many people watching you now. So now what is ESPN to do? They need to cut people. They need to reduce structure. They need to reduce salary, which is exactly what they've been doing. That's why they fired a bunch of people, laid off, restructured, and now they're trying to figure it out. But one of the things they're trying to do is figure out what do they do on the distribution side, because cable TV isn't working anymore. So now they need to either introduce their own streaming, which streaming now is like, there's too many streaming platforms. We essentially have gone back to the cable days now. Or they need to partner with
Yeah,
somebody on
definitely.
distribution. And so Amazon, because Amazon has been making headway into sports by purchasing like NFL Thursday Night Football, YouTube has the NFL Sunday Ticket, Apple TV has MLS streaming, right? So obviously these streaming platforms are now becoming the new distribution platform for content studios. And so now ESPN is shopping around, and I hear that Amazon is one of the people that they're having conversations with.
Yeah, I see.
That's wild.
Well, I
It
think
is.
Amazon should do a deal with them. I think they should. I think ESPN needs a deal. Clearly, they need a distribution deal. I think I like ESPN. I like watching sports these days. I find it hard to sit down and watch full games of anything. So I love clips and I love takes. I love First Take. I like the Stephen A. Smiths. I like the Shannon Sharps, etc. Balances, etc. I'm not sure if they're also under that same umbrella, but
No, that's
I
Fox.
like
But that
and
is
they,
Disney. That is owned by
yeah.
Disney, though.
I did okay. So Disney still is Disney is like that. Everything that we see in sports, Disney is pretty much is there. But yeah, I think the only thing I can really say is that I think that, yeah, they need to, the time for them to start doing these deals with things like Prime and whatnot was probably 2 years ago. And they're starting to do those deals now. And whatever they need to do to make sure that they have the viewership, they need to make sure that they're doing. So they need to know where the eyeballs are at and make content based on where the eyeballs are at. And so I guess if the eyeballs are on TikTok, don't try to fight against it. Make content that does very well on TikTok. The eyeballs are on Twitter. Strike a deal with Twitter or X, or that X is that they seem very open to a lot of change right now. If I'm them, I'd probably try to get some type of ESPN situation going on there. But yeah, basically they seem like they're in survival mode, and I think in that mode you just need to focus on your viewership, because like Dre said, like no businesses are essentially trying to advertise and they care about your reach, and so if you're not reaching as many people, then like Dre said, it's like market dynamics. It's, we're not gonna pay X, Y, and Z if your numbers are dropping drastically. That doesn't make any sense. You know what I'm saying? Matter of fact, we should actually probably pay. That's when it gets bad, and that's not a place they want to be in. So I suggest that they do a lot of partnerships with like distribution.
They need to fire. They need to
But
fire the whole management team at ESPN. They've dropped the ball on so many
negligent,
things. It's just negligent. They should have bought the UFC.
you know.
They should have been buying. They should have just buying some of these
Mhm.
cheaper content assets and just making better strategic
Yeah.
moves. The problem that came down to ESPN is the same thing that happens to many companies, unfortunately. And why we're about to see the death of so many
Mhm.
companies is they get so scared to cannibalize their existing business model. They get so scared
Yeah.
to change up how things have been done. In spite of the fact,
Yeah.
seeing the writing on the wall, it was clear that less people are subscribing to cable. So even though they knew that, it's been clear for the past 10, 15 years that this is where it's going. They still failed to act. And so I can't see how you allow anybody to hold on to their responsibility when they didn't manage the responsibility because they failed to act. And now they're scrambling when it wasn't really necessarily needed to be scrambled. ESPN is one of the greatest sports brands there are.
They have
So there's no
leverage.
reason that they should be scrambling at this point in the way that they are. It just purely comes down to poor business management in my eyes.
How do you think this any deal that does get worked out, how do you think it could go wrong for ESPN and lead to like literally ESPN becoming irrelevant?
Like as far as like them doing a deal, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if a deal would make them. I think the deals would make them more relevant. I think they need the deals to be relevant. I think they're losing relevancy. I don't know if I see the opposite, but maybe I'm looking.
Mm.
Maybe I'm not seeing it.
Maybe if they do, I think the only thing that I would make them irrelevant, I don't want to say irrelevant, but I think could maybe hurt them is to go exclusive, right? And I can see why they would do it, but I
Oh,
would be
right.
cautious on that. So exclusive meaning like
Yeah.
they only go to Amazon. Not everybody's an Amazon Prime subscriber, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
that's where my head was going.
I
yeah,
got
so
you.
now
I
you've
got
cut off some of the opportunity. But the same could be said for how they did exclusivity on the other side as well. But unlike that side, if you had Comcast, it wasn't like you could only watch ESPN if you had Comcast, right? No, if you had DirecTV, if you had AT&T, any cable, you could watch ESPN. So I think the thing that I would be cautious with if I'm ESPN is striking a streaming deal, thinking that you're going to get this wide audience, and then you end up pigeonholing yourself into one or the other. So I think they should try to go broad with their content. If I'm doing that, I'm
Yes.
talking to Apple. I'm going
Yes.
to talk to Amazon. I'm
Yes.
going to talk to X.
Yeah.
I'm going to go talk to YouTube, right?
Mhm.
Like you got to
Yeah.
have a conversation with all
Yeah.
of them and get it and basically recreate what they did in TV, meaning like they went to Comcast, AT&T, DirecTV, recreate
Yes.
that, but in streaming to maximize distribution. Maybe the unit economics don't work out the same, but then that's a different business problem to solve for. But in terms of distribution, that's probably how I would try to approach that. Anything else other than that, I could probably see the relevance losing because now you're not going after the widest network.
100%. Yeah. You don't go. In their case, they can't afford to. It would be counterintuitive to go exclusive. It would be counterintuitive. Whatever money they're taking in the short term to do yeah. I think their content is the valuable part, and they definitely don't want to be pigeonholed because there's always unintended ways in which case your content can be used. And when you have an exclusive deal, although they usually make those very attractive up front, they definitely want to look at that long term. Now, if they do an exclusive deal, which like we don't think is a good idea, they do it. They better make sure it's a very large deal. And they better have a plan after, like they better be a large deal and the terms, the term length needs to fit the current market. The days of doing 20-year licensing deals or whatever the case, let's let that go. Like exclusive
Facts.
deal, big amount, maybe for a short period of time, but let's not get locked in for 10 years on one network or anything like that. I don't care who it is because we're seeing an
Man.
acceleration across everything.
People been eating off of those 10-year deals, bro. I don't know what it is about locking in those 10-year contracts. Like for 10, bro, imagine locking in something for 10 years, bro. You're gonna be straight. You're gonna be straight for the next 10 years, bro. And you about to at least get $1 billion a year for the next 10 years, at least. Man, it'd be hard for me to make some choices too. I probably wouldn't move as fast. If I know I got $1 billion,
exactly.
I got $1 billion. I probably move a little bit
I
slow,
know,
a little bit cautious.
but you know, it's funny because we're also business owners. We know what would make us do the exclusive deal. We know why we would offer. I know we step into this executive role, and we're looking at it. We know why we would offer an exclusive deal, and we know why we would make it a certain amount because we want to. You want to drive that urgency. And it's just a dynamic of leverage and whatnot. Dre said management needs to be looked at because there are early signs. You don't just lose leverage. Like it is hard. It's hard enough to get to the top, even harder to stay there. But you just definitely don't lose leverage you don't lose leverage overnight. I'm saying so they gotta be looked at, and hopefully some younger, not even younger. It could be any of all whatever, whoever has the best ideas and the best sales and connections or whatever. But yeah, for sure.
Brylan, they need to hire you, man. You need to go in there and restructure. Go in there and be the CEO. Would you go run ESPN?
Honestly, I feel like that would be like a super fun job, bro.
Yeah.
I would
ain't
run
even gonna cap.
WeWork. I would run WeWork.
You would run
I
WeWork?
feel like
Yeah, because I know their problem. I know their problem very clear. Is that I like to me, I feel like so I've been paying for WeWork for the last 2 years. When we first got to California, that's all we lived in WeWork. We'd be there 24/7 when nobody was there, spending full nights at WeWork. I I would because to me, I don't want to oversimplify their problems, but they are wasting space and they need a lot of renegotiations to happen. And this is I would run WeWork. I would run
That's
WeWork.
interesting.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah,
Brylan,
yeah.
why would you? What were you about to say about ESPN? I agree with you. I think that would be a very interesting job. Like the best sports network
I
in the world. Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I don't spend a lot of time watching sports, but like when I think about it, I feel like before ESPN served multiple generations, where now I feel like maybe the millennials are carrying them, and maybe like the baby boomers and things of that. Because when it comes to the younger folks, that's overtime, and
Yeah.
ESPN ain't competing with them. And so I just feel like with a long enough time horizon, ESPN will be replaced by overtime. And I think the way overtime is strategically going about getting into these leagues and integrating themselves a lot more into these stories, where ESPN has been slow to move is understanding that like people don't follow teams, they follow players. And Overtime's whole strategy is built around that, especially from a young age. It's just a matter of time, bro.
Hmm.
And so I don't know how much I believe in ESPN, just because I know even when I was at Bleacher Report, bro, and Bleacher Report had House of Highlights. ESPN, they were behind on that whole social media, building a business around it. That was the Bleacher Report area, for example. They went and paid dude who founded House of Highlights, which was just an IG account. They didn't buy the brand, but they bought him out and paid him multiple $1 million to be able to do that. And so I feel like ESPN's strategy when it comes to content has been through like acquisition of talent. But I only
Qu-
feel like that's gonna go that can only get you so far over a
qu-
long enough like time horizon.
question for Dre maybe. Just so so if Disney sees one of its children struggling, what does it do? It sees one of its babies struggling. What does Disney do? Are they supposed to do anything, or what do they where
Yeah.
do they step in and say enough is enough?
I'll go a step above that and say, really, what happens with a company like Disney is that like activist investors and like shareholder pressure will drive Disney to make a decision. And so I think what they will most likely do is either try to restructure the business in order to take advantage of the shift. So whether that's streaming or what we already talked about, or they're going to be forced to break up the company and spin off ESPN because ESPN is
Right.
hurting the balance sheet of
I
Disney,
see.
right? It's making
So
it
like sell
absorb
it.
certain losses. Yeah, so they would sell it, and that has come up. I've seen that headline come up as well. And Disney has done that before. If assets aren't performing, they would sell it. Now, obviously, ESPN is a marquee brand for Disney. I'm sure
Yeah, yeah.
I'm sure the conversation around
They don't want to
selling
let
it
go.
is, yeah, it's probably less. That's probably less of a conversation, but I would bet 100% that is at least part of the conversation and part of the consideration. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, public companies are predominantly forced to do what activist investors want them to do, right? That's just the way the nature of it works. And activist investors want the share price of Disney to perform at its absolute best and at its absolute maximum capacity. And if there's anything that's hurting that, whether that be a brand, whether that be an executive, whether that be employees, whether that be whatever, then a change will need to take place. And so, yeah, something drastic will have to happen with ESPN or just Disney in general, because even their movie side of even the content side of Disney Plus is starting to see some cracks. Right, they're losing money on that business as well. Although they have subscribers, it isn't making money. And at the end of the day, businesses are here to make money, not necessarily to have subscribers and just revenue.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It seems like I've seen a few rumblings about certain people that seem to be determined to be some of the MVPs of ESPN. For example, I think even though Stephen A has his own podcast, I believe he also contributes a little bit to ESPN. I could be wrong about that, but it does seem
And that's
there's
another risk for ESPN.
talent, losing talent.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it, because right now they're playing the whole side hustle game right now,
Hmm.
where ESPN is a good stable check for them, but there's a reason why they're doing these podcasts and starting to build up that whole kind of like
Yeah,
audience.
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. Are
Like,
you talking about the other talent? Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
This
Yeah, they're not
is
hedging it. They're not fooling on. They're not fooling. They're not fooling. Yeah.
nah, and think about it. As ESPN's revenues continue to decrease, you're only gonna have so much money you can spend on talent.
Yep,
You
exactly.
are, which is why actually,
Mm.
I was shocked. Is this true? Shannon and Stephen A are going to be like, is it First Take? Is that or is
That's what
that
I've been
true?
seeing.
He said
Is
it.
that
Stephen A.
Because
announced it. I
it's
think
Skip,
Shannon
it's
will
Skip,
come on twice a week.
Keyshawn Johnson, and Michael Irvin.
Yeah. Yep. That's what I heard. Yeah. But yeah. Yep.
they
I
better
heard the
pay
same thing.
them whatever they need because they're some entertaining people and people are a bit like, and these people have that like Brian said, they have their own platforms they're building, and if you want, yeah, like they need talent and they need people don't want to, because now I want to watch First Take because Shannon's on there. Not to say I wasn't watching it as much, but I want to watch it more now. And yeah, people follow players, but they also follow entertainers. Period. And yeah,
Before
that's
we
intriguing.
before we drop off though, but
Nah, I
switching
know.
speaking of
Yeah,
platform real quick,
that's going to be interesting to see it all play out. But yeah, man, the
I
world
wanted
of
to ask
sports may
y'all.
be totally transformed. That would be very intriguing. I'm actually curious. Yeah, I'm curious if Google with YouTube has thrown their names into the bucket, especially with like them
For
pushing
sure.
YouTube TV and things of that
For sure.
nature. So
It's all good. We can go ahead and wrap
Okay,
it up then.
cool. We'll catch everybody next week. See y'all later. Talk to y'all later.
1,